You've done the bulk of your planning for your podcast, but there's one thing we haven't covered yet, and that is how to schedule your recordings and also start reaching out to guests who you may want to have on your show. In previous videos, I have talked about something very briefly called bulk recording, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that today because honestly, I don't know where I would be if it weren't for bulk recording. Bulk recording is the practice of recording multiple episodes at a time. So if, let's say you've got a weekly show, you wouldn't record each week for your podcast. Perhaps you record once every 2 weeks or once every 4 weeks, depending on how many episodes you want to record at a single time. Now, this can work great for some formats because it's just one day or perhaps 2 days a month that you've got to set all your equipment up, that you've got to get your guests scheduled, and the rest of the time you're editing your episodes, perhaps you're creating marketing material around your show, but a lot of times the actual recording is what can really kind of mess with our schedule. So bulk recording is the ability to minimize that by saying, you know what, instead of just sitting down and working on one episode, recording one episode, I'm recording 2 or I'm recording 4. That may seem a little bit daunting at first, so don't worry about having to do that initially. If you're just trying to figure everything out, just do one episode at a time. But as that becomes easier and easier for you, I want you to think about the possibility of recording multiple episodes at once. At one point, I had 5 podcasts, and each of those shows were releasing weekly episodes. There's absolutely no way I would have been able to do that had I not decided that for each podcast, I was only going to record one time per month. And then in that day, I recorded 4 episodes for that podcast and just released those throughout the month. That's what bulk recording is all about. It gets us in the right frame, the right mindset to be able to record, and then we just roll with it. Now, that may not work for your podcast. If you have a timely show, something that, you really talk about timely events, whether they're events that happen in your own life or perhaps they're news events, things that are happening in the world, you obviously can't do bulk recording. But for most of us, we have what's called evergreen content, which means the content you produce is just as good today as it is a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, perhaps even a year from now or longer. And with formats like that, then bulk recording absolutely works. The next thing I want to talk to you about is scheduling. So let's say you've decided that you're going to do bulk recording. Now you need to figure out when you're going to do these recordings. My advice is to schedule out at least 3 months in advance. So get your handy dandy digital online calendar out and mark what dates those are going to be. Now, it may be really simple. If you have your own show and you don't have a co-host and you don't have guests, then that's the easiest because you don't have to work with anybody else's schedule. You just figure out what works for you, you mark it on your calendar, and then you stick to your calendar. I also recommend that you use an online scheduler for booking guests. If you haven't used one of those before, they are a time saver and it helps so much. You can simply select what days you're going to do your recording. You send your guest the link. They can see what dates line up with their schedule. They pick the date, and then here's the best part. They're automatically sent reminders of that upcoming recording date. So you don't have to worry that your guest somehow forgot about the recording. Just make sure they get those reminders and you should be good to go. But what else should you be sending to your guest in advance? Because many times you may be working with someone who's never been on a podcast before, or perhaps they're not very tech savvy. So there's a couple things that I like to do. First of all, I always like to send them the script in advance. And I make sure my scripts are Google Docs. So that way I only have to send them a link. I don't have to send them an attachment. And in that script, which you have a template, by the way, of the script I'm talking about, in that script, it has the link for recording. So we just have to join at that link at the right time, and we'll both come on the recording page so we can record together. So it's the script, it's the recording link. You can also ask them for any kind of marketing information to help you promote the episode. So perhaps you need a photo of your guest. Perhaps you're going to include their bio on your website. Maybe you want to know their important social media handles so you can tag them in the post that you're creating and what you're going to create once the episode is available. So you may want to ask them for some basic information like that. And the last thing I would make sure that you get from your guest is a release form. I've always used release forms for my podcast. And on one of my podcasts, I had a guest on the show. She was a great guest. She did multiple episodes with us, but I knew she was very specific about the types of content that we promoted on the show. And years later, it was literally 2 years later after she had been on the show, she found out that we were working with an advertiser that she didn't like. And so she kind of made this big deal about us taking down that episode. And had I not had the release form to say, listen, you sign this release form, and in this release form, it states that I have complete control over what we do with this episode. You can make your own judgment call, but for me, in that circumstance, it was really important that that episode stay up and be available. Maybe it wouldn't be that big of a deal in your situation. Point being, you need to make sure that you have complete control over the episode and that there's nothing they can do to force you basically to take down an episode. You have all access to the rights, everything is yours, and that's really what a release form states. And you don't want anyone interfering with that. So I always recommend that you have your guests sign a release form. That can be as simple as a Google Doc. Right? That can be a Google Forms. In fact, that's even better. That can be a Google form that they can digitally sign and send it back to you. That's a legal document. But make sure you send them something. Make sure they sign it before you record. I promise you will thank me for it at some point. It may not get to the point it did in my situation, but I promise it will solve a lot of potential problems in the future. So let's do a quick review of what should be included in the email that you send to your guests to help prepare them. We're going to send a script, preferably a link to a Google Doc to make it nice and easy for them to make changes. You're going to send them a recording link, which may be in the script. You're going to send them and basically request for marketing information. So if you need their photo or their bio, their social media handles, and you're going to send them a link to fill out and complete and sign a release form. Doing that in advance before your recording is always ideal. Sometimes that's not possible, but that will definitely help you out in the long term. And I've created some samples for you, some email templates basically. So make sure you download that document and check those out.